German battleship Bismarck. The Bismarck would be named after the Prince of Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck. The Bismarck would be so revolutionary to her time that she would have her own class created in honor of her called the Bismarck class. Her complement would be approximately 103 officers and 1,962 enlisted men. Bismarck's keel would be laid down on July 1st, 1936. She would be built by Blom and Voss shipyards in Hamburg, Germany, and would take 4 years to finish. Construction would be finished in 1940, and the Bismarck would be launched on February 14, 1939. She had a suggested launch weight of 35,000 tons, this being the very limit of the international naval treaties created after World War I. But in fact, the ship would have much heavier displacement, especially when fully loaded for combat. The ship actually had a displacement of 50,405 tons, and she would be commissioned on August 24, 1940. Bismarck would be over 820 feet long and 118 feet wide. Her draft would be 33.5 feet. With a full armament, she would displace 50,900 tons, with nearly 40% of the ship's weight resulting in her armor plating. Her main armor belt at its thickest point would be 12.6 inches thick. Bismarck's horizontal armor thickness would be 4.33 inches thick, and her main guns would be 180 to 360 millimeter turrets, with 4-gun DRH LC-34E mounts and SKC-34 gun calibers up to 380 millimeters or 15 inches. The ship's conning tower would be 13.78 inches at its thickest. She also had 6 turrets that each had 2 SKC-28 150mm guns. Bismarck also had 8 turrets, each containing 2 C-33 105mm caliber guns. In addition, she also had 16 twin-mounted SKC-30 37mm caliber machine guns. There were also 12 C-38 20mm caliber automatic guns. The ship also would be equipped with 4 Arado AR-196 seaplanes. Bismarck was powered by 12 Wagner superheated boilers that geared 3 Baum and Voss turbine engines. These engines could produce 138,000 horsepower. Her top speed would be 30 knots, and her cruising range would be 8,410 nautical miles at an average speed of 15 knots. On May 28, 1941, Bismarck would commence with Operation Rhine. Her primary task would be to disrupt British shipping supply routes. She would be doing on the surface of the water what the German U-boats were doing beneath it. But she would be spotted by the Royal Air Force by a Spitfire on May 21st near Bergen, Norway. Britain immediately dispatched ships to intercept the Bismarck. One of these ships would be the HMS Hood. The Hood would be Britain's flagship. With 8 15-inch guns and weighing 48,000 tons, she would be 860 feet long, and when launched in 1920, was the largest and fastest battleship in the world. However, it would be Bismarck that would have the edge in firepower, as Bismarck was able to fire 3 shells a minute as opposed to HMS Hood's 2 shells a minute rate of fire. The Hood was also classified as a battle cruiser that was built more for speed, whereas Bismarck was a battleship which had much thicker armor plating and could withstand more firepower than the Hood. The thickest part of the horizontal armor plating on Hood was no more than 3 inches thick. The plunging fire delivered by the Bismarck would be able to pierce the plating easily. The 2 warships would meet on May 24, 1941, in a showdown of Leviathans. The HMS Hood would be accompanied by the HMS Prince of Wales, and the Bismarck would be accompanied by heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. The opposing ships were located 13 miles away from each other, the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen to the northeast, and the Hood and the Prince of Wales to the southeast. Bismarck would strike the Hood near the aft end of the ship, near the rear mast. The shell would penetrate the deck and ignite some of the ammo stored below. The next hit would be on the Hood's conning tower. The last shot on the Hood by the Bismarck would be 1,700-pound armor-piercing shells striking through her, piercing her deck, igniting the main gun ammo below. The resulting explosion would ignite the ammo and cause an explosion that would rip the ship in half, causing her to sink rapidly. The Bismarck and Prince Eugen would then turn their attention to the HMS Prince of Wales. The first hit on the Prince of Wales would be to the compass platform, and after multiple strikes on the ship, and with problems with her new guns jamming, the HMS Prince of Wales would retreat. The Bismarck and the Prince Eugen would elect not to pursue the fleeing ship. The Bismarck would also suffer damage caused by the Prince of Wales that caused flooding and loss of fuels. Bismarck would then set sail to occupied France for repairs. Back in Britain, the news of the sinking of the HMS Hood both infuriated and ignited a desire for revenge against the new German battleship. In fact, Winston Churchill himself said that the Bismarck must be sunk at all costs. This began a search for the mammoth warship by every available British ship and plane. The search would be led by Fleet Admiral John Tovey. On May 26 at 11:30 p.m., 8 Swordfish torpedo bombers that were launched from the aircraft carrier Victorious would find and attack the Bismarck. Each plane is armed with one Mark 12 18-inch torpedo, and they would break into 3 attacking groups, dropping from 200 feet to just 60 feet altitude. The Mark 12 torpedoes that they carry can reach speeds of up to 40 knots when launched. The Bismarck would be struck midship. The resulting explosion against the armor belt caused the triggering of the shut-off valves of the turbines, and they would have to be restarted manually. With little damage to the ship caused, and out of torpedoes, the Swordfish torpedo bombers would retreat back to the aircraft carrier Victorious. The plan would be to keep the Bismarck in sight and return with more torpedo planes for attack. The Bismarck would double back and loop her course, causing the British ships to lose track of her. The ship was then back on course towards Nazi-occupied France for repair and safety. The Royal Air Force would then use American PBY seaplanes. These planes had a range of 2,500 miles and were able to cover huge search areas. The Bismarck would then be spotted by one of these planes in a position 700 miles east of France. On May 26th at 7:40 a.m., 15 Swordfish torpedo bombers would be launched for an air attack from the aircraft carrier Ark Royal. During the attack, despite evasive maneuvers by Bismarck, she would be struck by a torpedo in her aft end, jamming a pair of rudders in a position 12 degrees to port. There was also a hole that was torn into the unplated part of the hull, which had water rushing into the ship. This flooding caused the scuba divers attempting to free the rudders to have to return topside. It was quickly realized that with the rudders jammed, the ship could only sail back towards the advancing British fleet. Surrounded by 6 British warships and alone, Bismarck would radio Berlin and advise of her situation. It would be the HMS Rodney who would strike the Bismarck first. Since the Bismarck's rudders were jammed, she could not execute evasive maneuvers, and she was a sitting duck. Later, a hit by the HMS King George V would take out Bismarck's gunnery controls and main battery, and by 9:30 a.m., Bismarck's guns would cease firing. Without the threat of her guns, the surrounding British ships were able to pummel Bismarck with shell after shell hitting the ship. Over 2,800 shells would be fired by the British forces against the Bismarck. The ill-fated ship would be hit 400 times, reducing the powerhouse ship into a burning inferno of twisted metal. But despite the barrage, Bismarck stayed afloat. At 10:21 a.m., the British ships ceased fire, and it would be the cruiser Dorsetshire who would move in for the kill. At 10:39 a.m., the Bismarck would sink by the stern. A combination of the Germans setting scuttle charges and abandoning ship, and the 3 torpedoes that would hit her would sink the mighty vessel. From the Bismarck's crew of 2,092, only 115 of them survived. Despite the battleship's superiority against other battleships, it was the Air Force that was the main downfall of the Bismarck. It was a torpedo hit to jam her rudders from torpedo planes that caused the Bismarck to be disabled, allowing the rest of the fleet to move in for the attack. The Royal Air Force would play a major role in the finding and destruction of her sister ship, the Tirpitz, as well. The battleship Bismarck was discovered by Dr. Robert Ballard on June 8, 1989. At well over 15,000 feet down, she is twice as deep as the final resting place of the RMS Titanic, also discovered by Robert Ballard. The Titanic and the Bismarck share many similarities. Both had surprisingly short lifespans. Both were modern marvels to their time period, and both were considered at one time unsinkable. Bismarck sits proudly upright and is in surprisingly good condition. Her main guns are gone as a result of them falling out as the ship listed and tilted during sinking. Since these guns are only held in place by gravity, they slid out as soon as the list became great enough. Dr. Ballard also noted that the ship was in relatively good condition. He found no evidence of implosion, which would suggest that the ship's compartments were already flooded as she descended to the bottom. This would support the German claim that they had scuttled their own ship.